Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapist Theater. It's the podcast where we take a look at relationships and mental health through the lens of movies, TV, and pop culture. I'm your host, Josh Treese. I've got a master's degree in marriage and family counseling and therapy, and I'm a practicing therapist in Music City, USA. I also love movies. No, I mean really love. I'm on a mission to help people more easily understand mental health and relationships and help break down the stigmas surrounding counseling and therapy. And that's why every week a guest therapist and I talk about a movie and what relationship or mental health issues it highlights. Thanks so much for downloading today's episode. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And while you're doing that, help the show out by giving it a 5-star rating and review in the podcast app. From the time we're born until, give or take, adolescence, our identities are pretty much given to us by our parents, our friends, and our community. We believe what they tell us about ourselves and become who they tell us to be. Then, in our teenage years, we begin the process of figuring out who we want to be and basically spend the rest of our lives on that. Today's guest, Jeremy Lehmann, was transformed by connecting with and understanding his identity, and now, as a therapist in Nashville, helps others in their journey. He also brought with him a movie that shows another person doing the same thing, Rocketman. IMDb says it's a musical fantasy about the fantastical human story of Elton John's breakthrough years. Saturday night's all right for fighting, dimming the lights, raising the curtain, and starting the previews. Welcome to the theater. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
I am so unbelievably excited to have you here. And in my life, there are, I'm going to call it, relationships that I grieve having never had, and that I only saw, this is a terrible title for a book, that I only saw in a rearview mirror. And all that to say, like, you and I were in several classes together towards the end of the program.
Sure.
I'm not sure we ever had a conversation while we were in those classes.
Not one single one that I can remember.
Mainly, some of that could be because I am eternally a back row sitter. I will, like, physically fight someone if they try to get me to move up from the back row. Yeah. It's just the appropriate amount of I can engage when I want and check out when I want and all of that. And you were second row?
Yeah, I'm always frontish because like sitting in the back, like there's all of the screens that everybody is on, and I don't want to see what you're shopping for on Amazon while I'm trying to like learn something here.
I have a picture from one of the classes that we had in Adams 404 where there's 3 rows in front of me, and in the picture, all 3 people are on Pinterest. And so in the picture, it's got all 3 Pinterest boards in it. And I sent it in class to all 3 of those people just to be like, hey, what's up? But all that to say, you and I had coffee last week, and I am just so upset at myself that we didn't have a chance to sit together and talk while we were in the program.
There's so much more freedom and room to do that now that we're not, though.
It's true. That program is a sprint while you're in it.
Yeah.
And I often said that if my nose wasn't in a textbook, then I was either asleep or at my job.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much.
Yeah. That
was it. So I'm so glad that I've gotten a chance to sit and talk with you now, and I'm so glad that you're here.
Well, thank you.
I like to start out every show by asking my guest, why therapy?
Yeah. So I knew that was going to be the question you'd ask because I'd listened to a couple episodes, and so of course I had to rehearse.
There you go.
Or try on a bunch of different answers, and I noticed while I was trying different answers on that a lot of them didn't. They felt flat and not interesting. It was the data about how I got here rather than something more connective.
Do you feel like you got stuck in content?
No, I felt like I got stuck in trying to manage my feelings around vulnerability about just opening up about me, rather than just letting myself be vulnerable and being okay with that. That sometimes feels itchy, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm gay. I've been out for 20 years, but like I've never had this like professional gay identity. I've done graphic design for 20 plus years, and that's
Really?
yeah,
Oh, me too.
yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
So sidebar, I spent like 10 years in the financial sector. I lived in New York, and like Wall Street was the world that I was working in. I worked for Merrill when in the late 2000s when we broke the world, and then Bank of America had to buy us.
Wow.
It was yeah. And so that's like I have this weird graphic design.
Your way I couldn't find a job in 2008.
me, it was that terrible PowerPoint presentation that I helped put together. That one. So, but I spent 20 years doing that, and it wasn't what I needed it to be. It wasn't fulfilling really in any deep way. I went into it because I wanted to be creative, but I was spending all my creative energy on other people's stuff, and it was stuff that didn't feel like it was super personally significant. So, being a gay person didn't really have anything to do specifically with my work as a graphic designer. But it does now. And so kind of trying to figure out how to talk about that and like take up space, was kind of the challenge that I was sort of navigating and realizing, oh, you're actually just avoiding that challenge rather than engaging with it. So I was born in 1973. This is the year that homosexuality came out of the DSM as a mental health disorder. I started...
Gert mentioned that
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, yeah.
Yeah. And then I started my marriage and family program at Trevecca in 2015, which was the year that the Supreme Court ruled on marriage equality. And those 2 years sort of bookend 4.5 decades in American evangelicalism. And so, like, that overlap between these two identities, I'm a gay person, and I have this also faith identity that was a big part of my life. That Venn diagram, that space where those overlap, is super complicated to navigate.
Big fans of Venn diagrams,
Right?
So,
And like when I first came out, I couldn't find somebody that felt like they would be safe. I had read enough to know that a lot of people who are trying to figure this out in this spot get shoveled into these conversion interventions, I'll call them. I'm not going to call it therapy. And I knew enough about how those went to know that that wasn't going to be okay. But it also meant that work that needed to be done wasn't being done because I couldn't find a place that felt safe enough to really unpack all of that. And in that spot, there's so much trauma. There's the ways that I wasn't allowed to get to know myself. I didn't come out until I was in my late 20s. And
that feels significant.
Yeah.
The ways that I wasn't allowed to get to know myself.
Yeah, I couldn't. I knew that in my context, and this was rational knowledge. Like this wasn't actually in my head, but I was really one of the last people to find out. This was known to a lot of the people around me, but it couldn't enter into my knowledge because the space that I was in wasn't really safe. This space would have tried to fix me, to force me into a different shaped box, and
when you say the space, you mean the system, the community that you were in?
The multiple systems, because I get told this in a lot of different directions. We get told this in a lot of different directions. We hear about this in our close relationships, in our faith communities, in the bigger social system. And there's trauma embedded in and surrounding all of those places. The ways that families respond to kids when they come out, or the ways that they fail to respond when kids come out, the ways that faith communities are explicit about helping us know that we're defective and that because of who we are, we're not really lovable, and that we're a special kind of bad.
That reminds me of the quote from Miseducation of Cameron Post from 2 weeks ago. How could programming someone to hate themselves not be emotional abuse?
Yeah, absolutely. 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 And then there's like the bigger socio-systemic trauma of we're constantly legislated against. Every single political cycle, we're the football. And I don't know what it's like for there to be an election season where I'm not the biggest social problem. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. I
haven't really ever experienced that. I grew up in the 80s. There was the AIDS crisis. We wouldn't talk about that. This was just the way that God punished people. And so just all these messages that I got growing up, that by the time I came out, there was just going to be a lot to unpack and work through, and trauma to name and heal from. And so when I started my own therapy, like looking for a therapist, I had a really great therapist. But I also was aware that it is hard to find somebody like me as a therapist. Like, for me to sit in the room with another gay person who's done their work, and I like what Gert said about possibility models.
Yes.
I don't have to be you, but you can at least show me that health exists. Like, you can give me that hope. And that's different coming from somebody like me that's lived through this experience than it is from somebody who's doing a really good job at being an empathic container, but hasn't lived through that same experience.
Yeah, I like when you and I had coffee, I really liked how you explained it there. You said that even somebody who can align, can have empathy, if they have come from a different experiential space, I think you said you had to feel like there was a certain amount of time that you had to kind of psychoeducate them and explain things to them.
And I don't feel that specifically, well, not only in like the therapy space, but just in life at all. Like, when people, I just don't understand how. I get that you don't understand how, and you're not going to do your homework to really get caught up, because I have, at this point, I have 45 years of homework of having to navigate life this way. 46. I guess I forgot how old I was. I guess I am of a certain age now. Whatever. But so, like, I've had all of this homework of, I know what it's like to navigate life with being somebody who the system actually actively pushes out to the margins. And so when I'm in the room with somebody who's talking about how their relationships aren't working the way that they want them to, or the ways that they're trying to cope and manage all of the feelings around that, I'm like, yeah, there's nothing about this that doesn't make sense to me. And people come into my room all the time and they're like, oh, this is just ridiculous, this is crazy. I'm like, yeah, which part of that was the crazy part? Because I didn't hear anything that didn't make any sense. And so I was talking to another therapist friend that I get together with all the time, and we were talking about some of this, and she's like, it's almost like you're becoming the therapist that you wish that you had. And I was like, oh. Yeah, that's... Yeah, that really is exactly what this is.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Noticing like the landscape and seeing what's there, and there's more now than there was, 5-10 years ago. And maybe it's just that the internet and people are promoting themselves better, but we're also terrible at promoting ourselves as therapists.
Some of us.
Some
of us are really good at it.
Yeah. True.
But Yeah, but
But when you're on the client side looking for something that matches kind of what you're looking for, it's hard to wade through all of that and find really what you're looking for.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about that is we as therapists are so good at engaging in other people's stories, but so bad at telling a story that is inviting
Yeah.
to people to get them to come.
Well, I've been the really good listener for my whole life. And part of that, I think, was really strategy. Part of it was, if you can be the important one here, I can fly under the radar.
I can hide.
I can hide. We don't have to notice all of the ways that I'm just at core defective. So that's one of the strategies of mine. The other one is being exceptional, which relates more to the movie. Like, if I can find some way to be exceptional, not just good enough, but exceptional, then maybe I can outrun this or distract from.
Well, that makes a lot of sense because in both cases, like, you're controlling how people perceive you.
Yeah. And in
or
both
how
cases,
much they get to perceive
yeah,
you.
but also in both cases, I'm abandoning myself over and over.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so, like, as a client in therapy, one of my tagline for my work was about learning how to take up a grown-up size amount of space in my life. Not shrinking, not being insignificant, but also not having to be outsized or exceptional or special in some way.
Like
To just be able to be me and that be enough.
Like a learning your value, but like your true value, because you don't, it's not kind of a braggadocious, like big, look at me. And it's not oh, I'm worthless and you guys are worth more, but it's I know who I am.
Yeah.
And I put a high value on myself.
Yeah.
And I am going to be in the space that is for me.
Yeah. And that I'm valuable because just because I exist, period. I'm not valuable because of, and I'm not valuable if you can avoid noticing this. I can show up as is, take up however much space that is, not need to take up more, not need to take up less, and be okay with all of that is.
Yeah.
Imperfect or otherwise. And
I love that you're becoming the therapist that you needed. In that kind of process, how does that affect your own inner work, like, currently? Does that allow you to do that kind of work differently? Like, are you able to speak to yourself kind of like a Richard Rohr observing the other, like giving yourself compassion now in a different way?
Oh, yeah. And that's really has been a big chunk of what has been important for me to do too. And I think that this is the relationship really that is hardest for a lot of us on this side, is getting to this place of having a good relationship with ourselves. I mean, we're systemic people. We talk a lot about the relationships that we're in and we're a part of, and we talk about our families and those larger systems, but I don't remember us talking a lot about that intrapersonal relationship, like, how do I connect with myself or not? In what ways am I a good friend to myself or not? How do I abandon myself or not? And so that in particular has been the work. Like, this is fine leaving on there, I guess. Like, I'll drive in the car and I have conversations with just me, as if I'm a person that needs to be heard.
Yeah.
And
you're not the only one that does. Like, I talk to myself all the time.
Sure.
Whenever we first got married, this is an absolute true story. We're in the apartment, and there were so many multiple times, too many to count, where Leigh-Ann would be in the other room and I'd hear her go, "What?" And I would have to go, "It's okay. I'm just talking to myself." And then I remember we were with somebody else once, and she told them, "I've had to learn to discern when is Josh talking to himself and when is he talking to me. And I've gotten better at it, but I'm still learning."
Yeah.
But yeah, you're not No shame in that game.
Yeah.
I do that all the time too.
So I'm always having this conversation with me, and it's usually not usually, it's just that me I've noticed has an age when I talk to him. And recently, probably within the last couple months, I noticed that when I'm driving there and having this conversation with younger me, that younger me was older than when we'd started talking. Like, the image in my head of me sitting next to myself, I was like, oh, that's...
You've grown.
I've grown, and that was an interesting thing to notice that. And I couldn't switch it back to... I couldn't younger him.
De-age?
Yeah, de-age him. This was something developmental had happened.
Wow.
In that space. This, I guess, reparenting of myself in a way that, and
what's
just
interesting,
learning to be there for myself and be on my own side.
And what's interesting is, like, through the connection to yourself that you've made, you're able to do that work.
Yeah.
Whereas, in the past, with these conflicting messages that you received, and really this dissociation that you were having to do just to exist within a certain space, it would have been impossible to do that.
Yeah. And the other thing is about me growing up right next to me. There wasn't a point where I thought, I'm going to imagine you as a different age. There was something about that development that just happened. I wasn't doing something. I was creating the conditions that made that development possible. Like, you have the tools that you need. If we can create the conditions for thriving to happen, then I think it will.
Yeah.
I don't need to fix something about you. Just, I have to be here, hold space, and hold your story well. But I don't have to meddle in you.
Yeah.
Like, you have what you need already in you for your system to take over and self-right.
Right. I think that goes back to what you were saying about just putting a proper value on yourself.
Yeah.
And almost like trusting yourself that you had it in you.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that anybody who raises their hand and says, I need help doing this, is any less.
No, not at all.
Because I would imagine you being able to do that wasn't just something that you developed.
No, but and also I need help is me taking up space. This is me advocating for myself in a way that I just wasn't allowed to do.
Yeah, because that's a very true. That's a realization. I have limitations.
Yeah,
I need somebody to help me do this.
Yeah, that's like pro-social behavior. This is the ability to reach out for and receive help is a marker of health.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that something that I fought against growing up was, like, growing up in the South, there was this high value placed on kind of independence, kind of and I'm going to use the term man here, and I mean it in a toxic masculinity way.
Sure.
Like, I'm putting that into this on purpose.
Yeah.
But, like, a man needs to be able to stand on his own 2 feet, and if he can't do it on his own, then it's not as valuable.
Right.
And so for me, like I think I said a couple of weeks ago, I had a conversation with somebody that helped me realize, therapy's not for crazy people. And then 5 years later, I went to therapy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was this constant thing I was wrestling against of, I should be able to handle this by myself.
Yeah.
Whereas getting to the place where I finally went to therapy, what I realized, and I think I realized this in hindsight, was my therapist helped me to learn, like you said, I've got the tools in me to not necessarily quote unquote handle it myself, but to engage myself more, which in essence is kind of the handling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to even bring those parts of yourself into relationship. There's this idea that I like called the central relational paradox. It's the assumption is that as humans, being in relationship is core to who we are and how we function and how we thrive. But we learn in our relationships that parts of us aren't acceptable. And so in order to preserve relationship, what we do is we pull the parts of ourselves out of relationship that there's shame attached to. And so what happens as a result of it is that this relationship itself then becomes a site of disconnection. So I'm trying to preserve connection here.
I'm trying to adapt. I'm trying to...
to maintain this, because in my core I know that this is what I need, but I know that this isn't acceptable here. This isn't acceptable. This isn't acceptable, and so I pull these parts out. But by doing so, there's less to engage with, and there's less real to engage with. It's like you're starving a fire of fuel and hoping it to get warmer.
Yeah, that is a paradox, because I mean, true intimacy is I bring my true self to the table.
Yeah.
You bring your true self to the table, and we share. So that's like in the pursuit of intimacy, I'm managing and bringing less of my true self, which by its very essence means it can't be true intimacy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Just blew my mind. Wow. So what I'm hearing you say is that your why therapy was in wrestling with these two circles in a Venn diagram, these two, like, I am developing my identity, but my identity is so attached to this community, this faith-based community kind of thing. Those two things seemingly being in conflict. Not even seemingly, but yeah.
I'm at the same time, I'm a member of two different groups, and these groups have long, deep history of mutual antipathy.
Yeah.
Like, these groups don't like each other. And I'm a member of both.
And not really in a covert way.
And not in a covert way. And it's not equally earned on both sides. One side is really responsible for doing the trauma.
Yeah. And so your work, gosh, I just keep coming back to that. You're becoming the therapist that you need. That is just such a beautiful...
And for me, so much of my work has been about really learning to love me. And then as that happens more, I notice how I'm able to occupy my other relationships differently, to take up a different amount of space there.
Yeah.
Instead of having to always be the good listener friend, I have something meaningful to contribute here.
Yeah. To take up an appropriate amount of space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you don't have to be the, I need all the attention.
No, I don't.
And you don't have to be the, I'm going to be invisible.
Yeah.
Which I guess would be like the opposite sides of that spectrum. You can be the, I'm just going to show up and be me. And you can show up and be you.
Yeah, and sometimes showing up and being me is that I'm a good listener right now. But if that's the only thing that I can do here, if that's overdeveloped, then it means that I also don't get to be known here.
Right.
So it's this balance of letting myself be known and knowing other people.
Others, yeah. Intimacy.
Yeah. Instead of letting the other person take up all the space in the relationship. Yeah. You're the one that gets to be known here, and I will play a supporting role.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. So tell me what movie that you picked for us to talk about today.
So I picked Rocketman.
Rocketman.
The Elton John biopic.
Yes.
That just came out.
I said to you before we started recording, when you told me what you had picked, I got super stoked because I had wanted to see that since it came out, before it came out. Like, there are very few musical artists that I actively remember engaging and loving, like when I was a kid, and Elton John's one of them.
Really?
Like, I do not remember our family going on many vacations, but I remember this one vacation my mom and dad and I went on. It was before my brother was born. Oh gosh, I want to say it was to Gatlinburg. I remember my dad having a bag of Nestle Crunch, like fun size things that he put in the tiny refrigerator in the hotel room.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing two songs from that trip. One was this Rod Stewart, bring over some of your old Motown records, put the speakers in the windows and the floor. Like I remember that. And then I remember Elton John's sad song, Say So Much. And like, it was the first time I heard him, and then finding him all along the way for like the rest of my life, like going back, finding songs, Don't Go Breaking My Heart.
Yeah.
Like Tiny Dancer is like transformative when you first hear it. Like,
especially when you hear it wrong. Hold Me Closer, Tony Danza.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. Thank you, Phoebe from Friends. I love Elton John. And so to see that a movie was coming out, I was like, holy cow.
Yeah.
So when you told me you're picking it, I was super stoked. And then I was like, I'm going to see what it's cheaper to get it on, Redbox or on iTunes. And it was on neither because it hadn't come out available to rent yet. And it came out available to rent today on the day we were recording. And so I got up at 4:00 this morning and rented it and watched it. Literally from 4 till 6 a.m. I'm sitting in my living room with my AirPods in, connected to the Apple TV, watching this. And then once Leigh-Ann got up, it like I put it on the speakers in the house and was like listening to, because I have several Elton John albums, so like listening to all of those, and just I remember when we sat down, I told you like Bohemian Rhapsody, that we had covered it on one of the shows, and I was like, it tricks you into thinking it's a good movie because of Queen songs, because Queen's amazing. And so you hear the songs, you see the performances, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's great. But then when you go back and look at it objectively, I don't think it's a good movie. I think the editing is all over the place and I don't like it. This was an incredible movie, Rocketman. I loved it.
And so I felt a little bit hesitant to use a biopic because it's somebody else's story. And I don't want to hijack that story to tell a different story or to talk over that story. But because of the way that the movie's told, it's like there's an unreliable narrator to begin with. Kind of the magical
Which I would say is the case with all of our lives. I don't know if we are reliable narrators.
Sure,
in our
but
own
it didn't
lives.
set itself up as an authoritative biography.
Sure.
There was...
Although he was an executive producer on it.
And I know that, but that especially sets himself up as an unreliable narrator just because of the way he tells the story.
Yeah.
And if he decides he needs to correct me on this, I'm happy for Sir Elton Hercules John to like call me up and say, "Hey, we need to talk."
Well,
about
we're
this.
gonna have your contact info at the end. So,
So he can totally do that.
if you get contacted from this, then I'm gonna need you to call me right away, and then we'll sort this out together.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great.
Well, I mean, I think I was thinking about that on the way over, and I think one thing when it comes to movies like this, if we cover them on the show, I think it would be helpful to say we are approaching the story as from the movie. So like we're going to be talking about Elton John as a character in the movie, recognizing that the real man's story may be different.
Right. And I'm going to kind of point more at themes than I am about any of them.
And so like nothing, well, I would hope this would be true about anything. We're not going to make judgments on the guy's life because of something.
I have no judgments to make. His life makes sense to me.
Yeah, but because of something that's shown in the movie, we're going to, it's a scene in a movie.
Yeah.
And so like we're looking at it as that.
Yeah. But also the choices you made in your life make sense to me.
Sure.
Like, how would you have made better choices if you're told that from the very beginning that you're defective as a human being?
Yeah. Well, that leads to the question, like, why did you pick the movie?
Yeah, so because I picked this movie because I felt like it narrated a lot of the themes that show up in working with queer people. And I just a note about vocabulary. Queer is kind of what I'm using more than LGBTQ because, one, it's less clunky, but also like referring to an individual isn't all of those letters. Like, I'm a gay man. I also can't be a lesbian.
Okay.
So using all of those letters to talk about a person, it feels tricky to me.
So are you going to use, during the show, queer as a catch-all?
As a catch-all for the whole category. When I talk about me, I'm gay.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Does that work?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of conversation that always is happening around that. But anyhow, that's an aside. So I picked that because I felt like it it pointed to some of the ways that trauma happens in our story, and related to growing up in a culture that assumes that we don't exist, and actively works against us existing, and like how that shows up when we grow into adulthood in our relationships in our lives and all the rest of that, and some of the work that I think needs to be done around that. At the very beginning of this story, he has his dad that's not really doesn't do a great job at being a father, and there's this one point where he asks his dad, "When are you going to hug me?" And his dad says, "Don't be soft."
Yeah.
And the ways that his dad actively distanced him, the ways that his dad actively otherized him, was just so heartbreaking to see. And then his mother doesn't really do a better job either. He's inconvenient to her, and kind of explicitly so. The only person that does a kind of good job at seeing him is his grandmother. But it seems like there, some of the seeds of you have to be exceptional are planted. When she takes him to the music academy.
This is your opportunity.
Yeah. Something about being... You can be as good as they are, better. Like, she corrects herself as soon as she says as good as. It's not being as good as anybody else isn't enough. You have to be better. And it's one of the themes, like, he becomes this outsized personality. He isn't Reggie Dwight. He has to be Elton John, and not just Elton John. He has to be Elton Hercules John. And so there's this, like, even in the name, there's this straining towards this outsized, like, colossal character, rather than just occupying his own life. And so it's that kind of authenticity isn't okay. We have to manage our feelings around actually being who we are and being okay with the limitations that exist, but also not discounting who we are. And so there was that piece of it that just from the very beginning, that who you are is not okay. It's not that there's this thing about you, because this is before he knew who he was. I mean, probably. I mean, we see him later and somebody calls him a faggot, and he seems almost confused by this assertion. Wait, what?
Have you seen Moonlight?
I haven't seen Moonlight, no.
There's a scene in that's the same.
Yeah.
Somebody calls the main character that, and he doesn't know what it means.
Yeah.
And so he goes to somebody that's a mentor to him and says, "Am I this?"
Yeah.
And he says, "There's no way for you to know yet."
Yeah.
And you get to decide that anyway.
Right.
Like.
Right. And how that has to get kept out of knowing. Like, we don't have the opportunity to figure out who we are in the world, until it's safe to start doing that. And so that was one of the themes, and like that shows up kind of as a developmental arrest in some ways, where he doesn't ever really it takes him until kind of the end of the movie until he's able to reconcile himself with himself. And
and that part of the end.
That
Holy
oh my
cow.
gosh, that very end, that when his whole family shows up in the room, and like there are all the people in his life, and he asks, like, little Reggie Dwight asks him the same question that he asked his dad.
Yeah.
When are you going to hug me?
Lost it.
Like, how could you not? How could you not?
Well,
because this is like him, like, it's that what I was talking about earlier about my own thing about having this little version of me that sits next to me when we drive and we just chat about stuff. It's when are you going to accept me as you? Like, instead of having
with yourself,
engage with yourself and not have this constantly antagonistic relationship with yourself.
Ooh, that's good.
Like,
antagonistic relationship with yourself.
There's so much of like this, I need to push these parts of these unacceptable, these shame-laden pieces of myself out if I can't get them out, I have to push them out of knowing.
Yeah.
Rather than just being at home and all of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
I think of some of what I do is like this rehoming of those parts. Like
Yeah.
that little Reggie
Self-acceptance.
Dwight. Yeah, that little Reggie Dwight gets to come home and be home, and for this to actually be home. This is a safe container for you to grow and develop and to be all that you need to be.
It's almost as if he became his own home because his home growing up was not.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that something that. So that part at the end where he's in the 12-step meeting, and then the lights on the outside of the circle dim, and one by one family members walk up and he interacts with them, and then it's his little self. When I was in my own therapy, one of my therapists, as a part of my group therapy, did a family sculpt psychodrama where I used people in the group.
Sure.
They played members of my family.
Yeah.
I set one of them up as me at 8 on a bed, sitting by myself. And the last part of that intervention was the therapist inviting me to go sit down next to myself and offer care and compassion that I didn't get when I was that age.
Right.
And then to invite me to realize you can do this anytime that you need to.
Yeah.
You can offer yourself this.
Yeah.
And I just saw that reflected in that scene. And I think this is one of the things that I think is just so beautiful about movies and story is my story is so vastly different than Elton John's. And yet there is this connective tissue.
Yeah.
Because I think he said at one point something along the lines of like, I don't hate myself anymore, or like, I like myself, or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's a major part for me. Like when I was 34, 35 working at Starbucks, realizing in Starbucks, oh, I like myself. And this is after a year and a half, 2 years of therapy. And then just kind of going, oh, if I have to work at Starbucks the rest of my life, but I get to like myself, I'm okay with that. Yeah. Like, I'm okay with that.
Well, and like so much of that was planted by, like there was this, when he had to come out to his mom because he was going to get outed by the tabloids or whatever, he calls his mom up and tells her, and her response was, I wish you'd just keep that sort of thing to yourself. You know you'll never be loved properly. No.
She said you are choosing
that she follows
to never be loved.
No, you will never be loved properly. You're choosing a life of being alone.
Yeah.
This and that idea that you will never be loved properly. I think that lives in our bones, like because we're told who you are makes you unlovable by us. The ways that you are inclined to love intimately are disordered fundamentally. And so your realistic option is enforced aloneness and loneliness if you want to be accepted by the community.
Yeah.
Like love and belonging, which are fundamental to what it is to be human being, are
hierarchy of needs
are always pulled off of the table for us.
Yeah.
You get to exist as a shell that doesn't enjoy any of the humanness of being human. That love and belonging, that intimate connection that we're made for, that is always trying to be, like people are trying to withhold and extract that.
It's like a re-trauma.
Yeah, it's ongoing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I thought, I don't remember the order, when he was on the phone with his mom versus when he went and visited his dad. But his dad at that point has a new family.
Yeah.
2 other sons. They come running in, and his dad is still kind of standoffish with him. His 2 new sons come in, and his dad puts his arm around them. They're hanging on him.
Yeah.
And I am just thinking of, putting myself in his place and seeing that and going,
it was excruciating to watch, and he didn't even want the record signed to him. He wanted it signed to his friend. I don't want this. I want to be associated with you by reputation, but I don't want to be in a relationship.
I want people to know that I'm your dad, but I don't want to be your dad.
I want them to know I have a famous kid, but we don't have anything here.
Yeah.
Oh, so crushing. And like, I think it was in his group, he was talking about, he was saying that real love is hard to come by. And so I've learned to cope without it.
Hey, everybody. I want to let you know all of the places that our community, which is still in need of a name, can be found online. First and foremost, there's the podcast, which you are currently listening to. Obviously, you found it on the podcast app that you're listening to it on, but you can also subscribe and listen on Spotify, Pandora, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Overcast. Next, we've got a Twitter. Check it out at twitter.com, username @therapisttheater, THTR. So THERAPIST, After that, we've got an Instagram. You can find us in the Instagram app @therapisttheater, all spelled out that time. Finally, you can find us on YouTube by searching Therapist Theater. And if you want to drop us a line via email, just send it to therapisttheater@gmail.com. In fact, why not email in your best suggestion for what our community should call ourselves?
And then there's that song, I Need Love, which just wrecked me. That was one of the songs of his that I hadn't heard before.
Yeah.
His isn't music that I've heard him on radio, and I've
Tough
known
to
him.
avoid.
Yeah,
in
yeah,
the
yeah,
80s
tough
and
to
90s.
avoid.
Yeah,
Yeah. But that I Need Love song, I hadn't heard it before, and I was like, oh, this is every person's inner script. Like,
Yeah, he had there was something similar several years ago. He cut a song, I think it was a new song on a greatest hits album that he released called This Train Don't Stop Here Anymore. And the music video, Justin Timberlake was playing him walking through scenes of his life, singing the lyrics.
Yeah.
And it was just very clear as he passed through certain parts, this is a very lonely
yeah,
time. You saying, pointing out him saying I had to learn to live without love. It reminds me, a week or two ago, I read a book by Russell Brand called Recovery.
yeah,
Best book on addiction recovery I've ever read in my life. Highly recommend it. And he sums up addiction just as the way that we teach ourselves to meet our basic human needs.
yeah.
And I thought, yep, spot on.
Sure.
And you see it in this
absolutely.
movie.
Yeah.
When he sits down at that group at the beginning and he says, I'm Elton John, I'm an alcoholic, a cocaine addict, a bulimic, a sex addict.
Yeah.
And he lists off
Yeah.
all of these things. And then as you move through the story, it really shows you this is a person whose basic needs were not met as a child,
Yeah.
who had to learn to meet those needs himself.
And who was told that those needs were illegitimate in the first place.
But that's the interesting thing about basic human needs is you can be told they're illegitimate and yet they're still there.
Yeah.
So it's impossible to grind needs out of somebody.
Right.
You can tell them all you want that this is not something.
Yeah.
And yet they persist.
Right.
And I think, to see him struggle almost against those needs,
Sure.
alcohol. I guess that's the bulimia thing. But I mean, good night. I mean, I think if there's something that you could be addicted to, he was addicted to it in the movie.
Sure.
Like alcohol, drugs, even the one part where he meets, I think it was Bernie in the restaurant, and for dessert, he orders 7 things.
Yeah.
And then as the waiter's walking away, oh, do you want ice cream? And he's like, yeah, bring it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just this, I've got this pain, I've got this inability to form lasting, healthy emotional bonds, and I've got to numb that because the pain is too much to bear.
Right. And I think that if you're going to tell people that the basic human need that you have here is illegitimate in the first place, and there's no way to meet it, that need doesn't go away, and so of course, unhealthy ways of meeting our needs are going to show up.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, how could they not?
Yeah, which
the need
I
doesn't
think
go away just because you wish it weren't there.
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize too that's a coping strategy, and it's one that for him worked because he's still here. He's still standing.
Right.
To quote.
Well, I mean,
the
isn't
song.
that how we pick our coping strategies?
Yeah,
We pick the
what
things
works
that work.
best.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there also comes a point, and like in the addiction world, you know, we call it rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
There comes a point where you get to decide, does this still work?
Right.
Does this still give me
Right.
what I want it to give me?
Yeah.
And he came to that point where he was like, this doesn't work for me anymore.
Right.
I want something different. Oh my gosh, the part at the end, just thinking about it, there during the credits where they show like the picture of him and his husband, and they say he finally found, what is it? He finally found the love that loves him back, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
It's a really nice, neat little bow, but knowing the real story, like knowing the story of the man, it doesn't have to be that concise, but it is beautiful to think, here's this guy who struggled his whole life for acceptance and for love and for a sense of belonging, and struggled to find it in a false way through addiction. And I'm sure that he would probably even say addiction to fame and performance and spectacle, and then found it in a very true way.
Right.
And then at this point is even retiring from touring to invest more in that connection.
Yeah. Well, no, like I see so much of that, like that outsized personality thing as a way of earning mattering. Like I have all the work that we have to do to figure out how to matter, since there is this defect to make up for. Like, in what other ways can I earn this my spot in this relationship?
That feels like the opposite side of the I'm going to be the best listener, I'm going to be the invisible.
Yeah.
That feels like the opposite side of that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to take up more space than I need to because...
Or not necessarily. Like, what is it that I can... Maybe my earning my mattering here is that I'm the good listener for you.
Different kind of performance.
Yeah, like it's a different kind of performance. Yeah, it's not about showing up authentically. It's about what role do I need to play here to preserve relationship, or preserve something like relationship.
Yeah, either way, I've got to earn my spot. How do I earn it?
Yeah, and either way, I'm not showing up fully.
True me.
Yeah, true me isn't here. And maybe I don't even know true me. Like that was a lot of like my work, like figuring out who am I, since I'm almost 30 now and having now finally starting to be able to be in a relationship with myself. Who is this person? What matters to him?
Do you think that... I know this is true for me, because like I started therapy when I was 32. Yes. And so for me, I had been divorced from my own heart for so long. It wasn't necessarily learning to not perform and have my real self show up, invite him to. It was, I don't even know who my real self is.
No, completely estranged.
I've got to, and that's why I use the phrase I was divorced from my heart. Like, I've got to re-engage my own heart and learn who this guy is, so that once I do that, like, I've got to have healthy intimacy with myself before I can have it with other people.
Divorced, I don't think for me works, because I don't think I ever had that relationship in the first place. Like I was born having to be estranged from myself, and so it was really this coming back home to who I am and just being curious what's here and what matters and what are you excited about and what makes you laugh, what makes you cry.
Yeah. What else stood out from you in the movie?
I think the big theme throughout was this feeling of lovelessness, and like love wasn't even on the table for him, and how much that was the driver in his life. This basic assumption that this need will forever go unmet, and how that I can't not see it in how he is on stage as a performer. I can't not see it in the difficult relationships he was in, the abusive relationships he was. He couldn't advocate for himself when he was in an actually abusive relationship because he didn't deserve love in the first place.
Yeah.
If you don't deserve love, then maybe this is what you deserve. And
he's standing in the room with his manager that he's in a relationship with as he dismisses the other two managers.
Yeah.
He's like standing there watching that happen and then just saying it's not personal.
Yeah.
Because he just is just kind of at that point going along to get along.
Yeah. And even his relationship with Bernie, who is a loyal, steadfast friend through the whole thing, like not even being able to really accept that love that really was there.
I did want to ask you about that because I think in this kind of total narrative across his life of, you know, believing he didn't deserve love, having so much trouble engaging in relationship, Bernie is this one. I mean, he even says later, "You're my brother."
Yeah.
And then at one point, like, Elton leans in and tries to kiss him, and he's like, "I do love you, but not like that."
Yeah.
And there wasn't this ew or rejection.
Yeah.
It was still this, "No, I do love you. I just love you in a different way."
Also so there's still this inability to recognize, oh, love is being given and it lands in a place that feels like it deserves it. Love is being extended, and there's something in me that thinks, wait, I need to push this away.
I remember
this isn't congruent with what I know about myself.
Yeah, and I know that it's tough sometimes when, you know, we as humans have trouble engaging in healthy intimacy. It's really easy in that space to think, oh, there's only one type of love. There's only sexual love. There's only romantic love, you know. Whereas, you know, here, which I think we have a need as a human for all of these. But like, you know, whereas, you know, here's Bernie who, I mean, would do anything for him.
Yeah.
Like does anything for him. Rides with him through the whole thing.
Yeah.
You know, until the scene at the restaurant where he walks out singing Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. You know, finally just saying, "Hey man, I'm tired. I've had enough. I've got to go and like get my own stuff together."
Yeah.
And then of course, I think, you know, Elton explodes, but I think it's because Bernie is the safest person. So here's and he doesn't really do that with anybody else in the movie. He does kind of like fire off a couple of times as manager, but it's in a different way. With Bernie, the explosion I think is bigger because it's like, here's the one person who I know is going to be around.
Right.
You know, kind of innately know that. And I love the thing in the credits where it said, like, you know, they're still writing songs. They still haven't had an argument in 50 years.
Yeah.
Which I have a tough time believing.
Yeah. I mean,
but I mean, just because I think you put any two people in a room and, you know, well, I want Five Guys. Well, well, I want Chick-fil-A. Like, you know, something's going to. Yeah. But, you know, I think that's just their way of saying, like, we've been together this whole time. I love you. I love you. You're my friend. You're my brother.
Yeah. I guess the other thing is kind of noticing how trauma really informs all of the ways he was showing up to the world. And not able to even engage with who he truly was, to be Reggie Dwight or whoever it is that he decides he needs to be in the world, and the authentic version of that, taking up an adult size amount of space, not a Herculean size amount of space, or
it's this constant need to have a protective shell.
Yeah.
Because it hurt so much back then.
Yeah.
And the shell is the addiction. The
Yeah,
shell
yeah.
is the pomp and circumstance. The shell is the money. The shell is the It did say at the end he still has a problem shopping, but like the shell is the, and it shows him with all these bags. Like,
Sure.
the shell is the shopping,
I mean, does
whatever.
anybody else in the world have that many pairs of glasses?
I don't know, but I tell you, I am fully jealous of all the glasses that he has.
So
Like,
jealous.
I would
So jealous.
love to have that many.
So jealous.
Gosh, it's such a good movie.
Yeah. Loved it.
Taron sings like it's him singing,
Yeah.
and he kills it.
He does.
Somebody told me a while ago that, because I thought that he was lip syncing. Somebody told me a while ago that it wasn't him. I was like, there's no way, And then I read something this morning that, yes, Elton was an executive producer, but was not involved in the music of the movie, except that he wrote a new song that at the end it was him and Taron duetting on the song
Oh.
that ran as it was going into the credits. It's them singing together. But he wanted to not be involved in the music of the movie to give Taron the space. So Taron then talked about finding this balance between imitation and interpretation in his singing.
Yeah.
And Elton was like, my songs aren't necessarily easy to sing, which I think I would disagree with. A lot of them are in the key of G. They're right in the middle range. Like, they're not the most difficult. I mean, Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me has been on American Idol more times than I can count.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, he wanted to give space to Taron to like interpret. Yeah. And I mean, I just think he killed it.
Yeah. Wow, that's a lot of freedom to give somebody when they're interpreting you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that even that is a good indication of the work, because he was able to trust, to offer trust that they were going to do his story right.
Yeah.
And I think that it was interesting. It was just such an interesting narrative device to weave. It reminded me of that movie that came out years ago, Across the Universe, the Beatles musical, where they weaved the songs into the actual story.
Yeah.
This reminded me very much of that. Mm-hmm. It was kind of like the true Broadway musical style of there's no separation between prose, as it were, like the speaking parts, and the music. The music is a part of the narrative. They're inherent
to the narrative, yeah.
Yeah, and it flows in and out.
Like Mamma Mia, where it's jukebox musical and we patch a story on top of it.
Yeah. I do kind of wonder, though, because Bernie wrote the lyrics to nearly every song, like, how much of the songs are Elton?
Yeah.
Or is every song this amalgamation of Bernie and Elton's stories? Like at the very beginning, when he's a little boy wearing the, jacket and tie and shorts and singing "The Bitch Is Back."
Yes.
Like,
yes.
I mean, I'm just thinking, like, did Bernie write that one? Like,
Yeah.
It. But I think, what you were saying about having these basic human needs, I think the need to know yourself is just so true and so powerful.
And the belief that I'm worth knowing.
Yes.
Like,
and to see people attempt to grind that out of him.
Yeah.
I would vacillate back and forth watching the movie between, like, being angry for him.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, being glad. Actually, for a lot of the movie, being angry for him and then being sad for him, because I would see these people enforcing their desired narrative on him.
Yeah.
And then I would see him, and I think it was out of fear and rage. Like, I would see him push back, but not necessarily push back into his truth.
Sure.
Just push back into these like empty faults kind of things. And it wasn't until the end where I just felt I mean, in that scene where the family shows up and he's
Oh,
like,
it just wrecked me.
yeah, where I just felt so glad, like, oh my gosh, integration.
Yeah.
Like when he
Yeah.
hugs himself as a little
Yeah.
boy,
Yeah.
that is him
Yeah.
coming to terms with his story
Yeah.
and deciding, I'm okay.
Yeah. Even in the face of hearing from his mother, do you have any idea how disappointing it is to be your mother?
Ugh.
Regardless if she thinks that that's true, he is still able to give himself the love and the care that he really needed.
But I wonder, I mean, you know, we're both systems thinkers. I wonder if she even thinks that's true, or if she just has this pain of disconnection from him for his whole life. And so, you know, there's the old saying, hurt people hurt people.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
if she's just still in that pain so much that all she can do to respond at all is to lash out.
Sure. And who knows what her backstory is.
Yeah. I mean, not that is in no way an excuse. Like, that's in no way
Yeah.
justifying
Trauma's
that.
trauma, however it shows up. And
Yeah,
however,
but it is a good thought of that trauma begets trauma.
Yeah.
And at some point, if you don't break the cycle,
Yeah.
then that will continue. I think, you know, when we were learning genograms, it was something, they call it like a family legacy or something
Yeah,
like that,
yeah.
where it gets handed down
Yeah.
generation to generation. And you can see, like, when we sit with clients and we do genograms, you can, you know, if a person shows up in the office and they're struggling with, I mean, fill in the blank.
Yep.
As you look back over the course of 3 generations, it shows up. Like,
Yeah.
very rarely is something just there in a vacuum. Oh man,
Yeah.
this completely unique issue just popped up out of nowhere.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at epigenetics and the effects of how trauma gets inherited and how trauma affects the expression of certain genes, and that gene change can then get passed down, it's kind of, it does, I think, a lot to let some people off of the hook in a way. Like, it's not necessarily about blaming your parents.
Well, it doesn't let them off the hook. I mean,
But-
it's the whole, a person makes sense in the context of their story.
Right. And yeah, that's a whole different tangent that I think is super.
Epigenetics, for anybody that's interested, is it's a person's DNA can be changed by their environment and by their nurture.
Yeah.
So, like, there's all these longitudinal studies where they took identical twins and they look at their DNA at the beginning of their life, and they look at their DNA in the middle of their life, and they look at their DNA in their older age. And even though they're identical twins, they can see the DNA has changed based upon what kind of life they've lived and how the environment has influenced that.
If anybody cares, there's a really good book about it called "It Didn't Start with You,"
Oh, nice.
about inherited family trauma by Mark Wolin.
Oh,
So
interesting.
yeah,
I'm interested in that.
yeah.
Tell me something that your clients have taught you.
My clients teach me all the time how they remind me of how resilient we are. That in the face of everything that's happened to you, you're still here. How did you get, like, I'm always like, how have you continued to make it given everything that's going on and that has gone on and that is still unresolved? That and I guess that continues to reinstall hope. I see growth happen in my office all the time. And every time I see growth happening, I just hope creates more hope. And
For some reason, the line from Jurassic Park that Jeff Goldblum says popped into my head: life finds a way.
yeah,
And I think based on what
Yeah.
you were saying in your why therapy about, like, helping you, seeing that you have the tools inside of you, and then you as a therapist helping people see you have
Yeah.
the tools inside of you. You have an innate resilience
Yeah.
inside of you. It's finding those exceptional outcomes.
Yeah.
If you think you can't, well, tell me how you got here today.
yeah, yeah,
How were you able to get yourself out of bed?
Yeah.
How are you able to get yourself here? You know, you can because you have.
Yeah.
You did.
yeah. And I guess it's the reminder that we really are designed to thrive. Like, it's in our makeup. As soon as we cut ourselves, our bodies immediately go to work repairing that. And we all I have to do is create the conditions for this to happen. In a way, I get to step out of the way and a lot of times just be the observer to the work in a way.
Or at most,
like
we're
I steward the container.
Yeah, at most we're the bumpers on the bowling alley.
Yeah.
Like they're moving,
Yeah.
we're just every now and then going, nope,
Yeah.
little more, little more,
Yeah.
little more.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, you spoke about how tough it is to find a therapist who is like you.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would want to say to anybody that's listening who maybe is farther back on the journey than you are and is maybe, you know, in that same space that you were and is looking for help? Is there anything that you would want to say to them that maybe you wish that somebody could have offered you?
The thing that I wish that I had that I needed and I wish that I knew how to find were safe people. There are safe people out there. And there are people that you can show up as is and in process, not even having started the process really. Like, you've opened the door and you're looking down the hallway to where process is going to be. There are safe people, and also on the other side that there's, like, I do believe that thriving here exists.
What are there any ways that you can know if somebody is a safe person?
God. I mean, isn't this the thing that we're always wondering when we're in relationship with
There
people?
is an element of experimentation, like you gotta be
Yeah.
willing to step in.
Yeah.
You know, but is there, maybe the inverse question is more true. Are there any things that you can see that would be a signal somebody is not a safe person?
Well, I mean, we kind of just know this. Like, we pay attention to how people talk around us. If you're using slurs when you talk about queer people, then probably not safe. I'm not sure if I have a great answer to that.
That's okay.
Yeah. The people that are safe usually are pretty clear that they're safe. Like, you can start with the ones that are more obviously safe, and then this is kind of how we do it. We start with the relationships. Like, when we're starting to figure out who we are, we start with the relationships where it's least likely to go awry. And
that sounds safe.
Yeah, so like, I started by talking to one of my longest running friends. I told her. And then you work your way up to the ones where there's more risk. So family came later, and it frequently does. Sometimes that hurts family. But it's like, when I'm talking with family members of somebody who's queer, I'm like, the reason that you were one of the later ones is that there was more to lose here.
The stakes are higher.
Like, the stakes are higher. The stakes are higher because you're one of the ones that matter most. And so, like, what we do when we're doing that, and I don't know that we realize this is what we're doing, but we're resourcing ourselves so that if this one doesn't go the way we really want it to or we need it to, we have a base.
I think that the movie said something about found family. I think Bernie was found family for Elton. And I think that sounds like what you're saying, kind of resourcing ourselves of starting from the relationships, are gonna, you're gonna have less risk in, those are the people that you're gonna lean into as the found family.
Yeah. And also, where do I go to figure out, like, about me as a gay person? Like, I can't really ask the straight people that I know this. They're not going to have a lot to help me with. And so, Yeah, that found family is super important, especially for queer folks.
Is there anything that you can offer to anybody that's listening who maybe wants to either learn to be or just wants to be more supportive and more safe? Is there anything you can offer them
Yeah.
as a way of how to lean into that?
Yeah. Start out just by being curious. Give yourself permission to suspend opinions for a while, or make judgments about. I feel like in a lot of ways, like in the context that I grew up in, the church has done just a terrible job by us. It abandons us and then also expects to be a moral authority in our lives. Like you can't have both.
You can't be separate and yet still have influence.
Right. Yeah, if you're going to cut me off and isolate me, then you also don't get an opinion on how I live. You don't get to expect that I owe you my ear, just because you want to say stuff. But to that, like, be curious. Work more at understanding. This is actually work that I still do because it's important for me that, like, I'm in that category of letters. I'm one of those. I'm a gay person. I can't speak for a trans person. And so it's important for me to kind of be paying attention to what's going on and what stuff is my stuff and what's more generalizable and what's not. I don't want to use my story as a template that I copy paste onto other people.
So you even practice curiosity in the community.
Yeah, like I haven't earned a spot of having an opinion about trans people. I don't. This isn't my lived experience, and it's not fair to me to walk into the room and say, "Oh, I've got expertise, and you should listen to me."
Yeah.
Because I know what it's like to be at this piece of the margin.
Yeah.
That edge of the margin, I don't. And
that's why
that's actually really an important thing in my room, like to center my clients as the expert in their life. Because in so many ways we don't get to be, other people get to be the experts on our own lives. And this is a space where you get to learn how to take up space. And I'm going to sit over here and be quiet and curious and not quiet, but
sure. But you're not
curious.
You're not going to impose you on them.
Sure not.
Yeah.
Sure not.
That's why I always, I try to ask, like, is there anything you can offer? Because I don't expect you to be an authority on everything or a representative or a speaker, but you, in your life, in your experience, you have wisdom inside of you based upon the road that you've traveled that I want to learn from myself, but also give the space so that anybody listening can learn from.
And there's more to just us than like it's not just me as a gay person in this room. I interact with the multiple systems around me. Pay attention to how those systems interact with people like me. Are those places that are trying to help me thrive, or are they places that are trying to help me know that I shouldn't exist? And try to imagine if you were in a spot where every election cycle everybody was voting about you and your relationships. What might that be like?
Yeah.
What might it be like to be in a room and not know who's safe here?
Or to have things decided for and about your life
by
that
people
aren't decided by people that represent you.
Right. That aren't affected by them.
Yeah.
If you don't think gay relationships are right, then don't be in one. Nobody is dragging you into a marriage with another man. Nobody. Like, swing your arms all you want, but like when your arms keep coming into contact with me, then I get an opinion about it.
Yeah. let's say that somebody was listening to today's episode and they feel like they could really connect with you. Let's say that they were in a spot now that you have traveled the journey and have become the therapist that you needed. Maybe they're a person who needs you as a therapist.
Yeah.
How can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is, my practice name is called Thrivery. I'm not interested in helping people just feel less bad. Like I want
Thrivery?
Thrivery. Yeah. It's a made up word, but whatever.
I like it.
Yeah, I do too. So thriverynashville.com.
Okay.
And there's a contact form and my phone number on there and an email address. So
nice.
any of those ways are acceptable.
I love it.
Yeah.
Jeremy, thank you so much.
Thank you so
for
much,
coming
Josh.
And just
I really enjoyed this.
sharing your story, and being willing to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Because I know that like anytime you sit with another person, that's scary.
Yeah.
Also, it's another level of scary, kind of putting it out there
Permanent record
on a podcast. Like, I was talking with another colleague yesterday, who's doing their own podcast now, and they were really nervous about putting a specific episode out. And I said, you know what's weird about this is that you're kind of speaking into a void, and you don't know who's listening to it. And so in a way, it just takes that extra level of courage to just trust. I'm putting this piece of me out there with faith, knowing that there's people that need to hear it and that they're gonna hear it and that they'll do what they need to do with it.
Yeah. And in a way, like we're the product, which is also scarier. It's like even scarier than like writing a dating profile.
Yeah.
I
So thanks. I mean, like I recognize that it takes courage, and I'm honored. I'm honored that you trusted me enough to steward that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice. Hi, my love.
Hey,
How's it going?
it's going great. It's been a 3-day weekend and I'm feeling great.
Yeah.
I think if every weekend was a 3-day weekend, I would always feel like I had my life together.
This week's show with Jeremy about the movie Rocketman.
Oh, yes.
Your thoughts?
I have a lot of them in general in life. And also about this. Of all, the movie was so good. How it happened, and you talked about this on the episode with Jeremy, that like you rented it the day that it came out and watched it at 5 a.m. or
4 a.m.
4 a.m. So I was not awake then. And you talked about how great it was, but that was like during a work week. And so for the next like 2 nights, you were like, all right, do you want to watch it? Like, we've got it, we've rented it for 2 days, so you got to watch it. And I just like wasn't feeling it. I think we had other stuff to watch, Bachelor in Paradise. And I don't know. I just was like, I'm not ready to sit and like absorb a movie. So we bought it and I watched it this weekend, and I regret all of my decisions. I wish that I had watched it every single night of the week. It's so good. It's so good.
And now we have it on a constant loop in our home.
We're never going to play anything else.
We have a TV completely dedicated to Rocketman.
We bought a new TV for it.
Yeah.
So
we actually bought a projector. We mounted it on the stairs so that it shows onto the big wall in the living room. Yeah.
So anyways, love the movie. And then, man, hearing you and Jeremy talk, I did at one point have to check myself, because I was like, oh, everything that I'm kind of pulling out to talk about is really just me wanting to like say things that he said and kind of point back at them and be like, hey, everyone, did you hear that? Did you hear that? I was like wanting to retweet everything that he said.
Subscribe.
Yes. I mean, really, truly
subscribe.
The first one was when he talked about, and a lot of it really was him sort of talking about his experience and his story. And I feel like that's always the case. Like it's obviously really cool to hear people's stories and where they're coming from. But one of the things that he said towards the beginning was, I'm going to use what he used, queer and then gay for him. So in talking about the queer community and being a part of it, and being gay, he said, we're the football in political cycles. he like talking about how he was like, we are the thing that gets tossed back and forth and like talked about in political cycles. And then he said, I don't know what it's like not to be the social problem that people are trying to solve in an election system. And that just,
Ooh.
I know. So that is like, that's an example of one that I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know if there's anything for me to add to that other than point out how powerful that is to hear. And he used a term that I have not heard before. He used the term sociosystemic trauma. And I just felt like that was significant. Like, that's a significant kind of trauma that comes from being part of a social group that, you know, our culture and our society treats as other.
I'm a little bit surprised that wouldn't have been a term used in social work.
I think other terms for that have been, and I literally just wrote it down. So I don't know if you Googled it, you know, what the other terms are. I've heard of that as a thing, but I think just the way he said it, just felt significant, you know, just that there's trauma that comes from that. And, I think it's really important that we recognize that in people and in people's stories. And you never want to, I just think it's important to never treat people like they, I don't know how to frame the words. Like, not that you should treat everybody as if they have had trauma, but like, you just need to be aware of that and like curious about other people's stories and their experiences, and not, you know, assume that, like me, you know, the political cycle makes me feel things, but it's different because they're not talking about me for the most part. So I was just thankful that he said that. And I know, like, I think you guys talked about this on the recording, that it's a little like, I know it can feel like you're saying things into a void with podcasting. And like, I just am really thankful that people share their stories, because I think they're important. And I felt that with him a lot. I felt like, I'm really glad that you're saying these things, because I know there's a lot of people who need to hear it and adjust their thinking, but also B, like, need to hear it and go, oh my gosh, yes, me too. I just felt that a lot with him.
I think that it's, I mean, at least for me personally, like a lot of the guests that I have on the show, I can't say a lot, a good amount are my friends. And I hope that even the ones that weren't before are after. And so to have somebody come and with courage and displaying vulnerability, share their why therapy, share part of their story that led them to pursue a career in the helping relationships field, I just consider it to be just, I mean, the highest act of trust and honor. And I just, and yes, like, it is going out into the void of the internet. But they're trusting me to edit it. They're trusting me to like steward it with care, and it's something I take really seriously. I don't take myself very seriously, but but I take that pretty seriously, and I'm really thankful for it. And it's something that I think, you know, in the initial thoughts of the show, just never in my wildest dreams would have thought that, you know, people would come on and share such immeasurably powerful, brave, wonderful things that, you know, hopefully are helping people all over.
Yeah. I think that's also, like, I didn't even think about this until you were just talking, but I think you've had a couple guests who sort of talked to you beforehand about, like, oh, just how to, you know, that why therapy question, like, how much of me do I put in that? And I do think it's 100%. I don't think that was an expectation that you had, you know, that it would become this deeply personal thing. But also at the same time, like, I feel like everybody's why is personal. So I don't know. I think it's not an expectation, and it's not something that we are entitled to. So it just feels like a gift.
Yeah. And it really is in hopes that, you know, I said in the intro of today's show of breaking down the stigmas surrounding mental health. And, you know, I think one of the stigmas is that therapists are not people. They're, you know, clinical or cold or something like that. And And really, one of the things I want people to know is that every therapist, every counselor, every social worker, everybody who is seeking to help others, they're a person who has their own story and are in it to give back. And therapy in and of itself is relational.
Yeah.
It's developing a relationship. And so to me, like the why therapy question and the, tell me something you've learned from your clients, like those are questions geared towards that, like to kind of show those things and break down those walls.
Yeah. When you guys were talking about the movie, there's just so many things in this movie. I just love it. I've talked enough about that. I won't talk anymore about that. But pretty quickly you guys got to the scenes where I keep wanting to say Elton, I guess Reggie, he asked his dad, when are you going to hug me? And how he responded and said, don't be soft. And Jeremy talked about how that was an example of, and there was more, but that was an example of his dad actively otherizing him. I'm putting that in quotations because I don't know if that's the word that he used or a word, but I think it was like otherized him. And I 100% agree and think yes. And also I think when he said, don't be soft, it wasn't just otherizing him. He also was teaching him in that moment to shut down his own heart and to not express his feelings and to not express needs. Like that was a child asking, when are you going to hug me? I need you to hug me. And his dad said, shh, don't bring that stuff out. Don't be soft. Like he equated feeling and vulnerability and needs with being soft. So I think that was just an important aspect of that too. Like that taught him, okay, don't need things from people, or
certainly
like
not
don't
from
trust
dad.
Yeah. Also he talked about the need to be exceptional. And that, I didn't even go there, like in the first watching of the movie. And so that was just, I just didn't pick up on that. So I'm glad he pointed that out, that's a thing. Like it wasn't just, it wasn't all the, oh no, what's the word that I'm looking for? Like it wasn't the shutting down the needs. It wasn't just like the, not like his family not being loving and supportive. It wasn't just that he became shut down after that. It's like it came out in the way that I am acceptable is that I am exceptional. And that's just not, and then of course at the end, like we see where that led him. And at the end, and I loved like the line that rolled across in the credits that said, he and his husband have been together for however many years, he's finally loved properly, or something like that. And I just loved that because it seems like, at least from the movie and, the after, like the credits part, that he learned that like he doesn't have to be exceptional to be loved.
Yeah, that was his way of earning his spot. And I think it's just the most beautiful thing that he found somebody whose spot he doesn't have to earn, who just loves him for him.
Yeah. Which leads pretty well into the next thing. And this was another thing that Jeremy said about his own story. And it was you talked about being divorced from your heart and kind of coming back to it. And I identify with that. Like I've, in the stuff, in things that I've gone through and then in finding healing in those, like from those things, I've had a sense of coming back to myself and like coming back to who I am. And he said he felt like he was born having to be estranged from, he said, I was born having to be estranged from myself and my heart. And that hit me hard too. Like, I think it's again, like if you've felt rejected, if you have felt like if your identity has been rejected your whole life by your family, by society at large, like if you looked in the media growing up and didn't see yourself, like, and you were rejected, then it's not, you never had a chance to like be in your identity. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm
Yeah.
rambling a little bit.
It's like a pre-rejection.
Yeah. And
Because
so
you encounter the rejection before you get a chance to settle into yourself.
yeah.
And so by hearing I am wrong so early, it doesn't give you a chance to feel secure in who you are
Well, and I feel
and
like
safe.
yeah, and I feel like now, like as an adult, and when a person finds healing and gets in touch with their identity, it is like it's a new thing. It's a different thing. It's not going back to what was before because it's never been.
Yeah.
It just, I think him saying that just clicked something in me. Like it made something really click, and it made me appreciate how it's a different level of healing to have, like, if your identity's been rejected your whole life and then you do find acceptance and like you
Yeah.
accept yourself. It just made me, like, I think, recognize and appreciate that that's
Yeah.
just a different
And
level.
in relation to that, like I thought, him saying, him becoming the therapist that he needed, him being a therapist who a client doesn't have to teach common language or concepts or life experiences to, that lets them kind of jump ahead to just having a common understanding, I think is just so powerful because it, for a client who is coming in and maybe is in the process of figuring it out, I would imagine having to explain things to somebody complicates that. Like, I don't know it all, but I've got to explain what I do know to you rather than just,
Okay, you get it.
I'm able to be and bring what I have and have you help me through it. I just think it's such an incredible thing.
Yeah, I agree. Another thing you guys talked about, and this was, you were asking him, and I might get the wording wrong here. So if this isn't correct, then I'm sorry. But like, you were asking him how somebody would know if a person was safe, I think.
Yeah.
And you guys started talking about that, and I just thought, and I think he said something similar to this, but like, I don't think that a queer person would need to have that answered. Like, I don't know if they would have an answer because it's a survival thing. And you and I have talked about this, I feel like in like another, having to do with another topic, but like, I remember I worked with, I was recently working with a person at a different organization who runs a group for queer kids in a school, in like a public high school. And they're not a part of the school. So they're not GSA, but it's like another organization. And they were telling me about how they didn't even really have to like advertise a ton, and they didn't want to because it was supposed to be a thing where like,
Can I ask what GSA is?
Gay Straight Alliance.
Okay. I thought Girl Scouts of America.
Oh, no.
But, okay.
Yeah, and it's like clubs in schools. It's
Sure.
allies, and yeah. But this was not that. This was a group for queer kids, and they didn't want to advertise widely because they didn't want it to be a thing where people knew if you came to this group, that's what that meant, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And they talked about how it was like the weirdest, coolest thing. They told me it's like there's a radar, like you just know if someone's safe. And they said it was a really cool thing because kids would like know what teachers, without having said anything, kids would come to certain teachers or certain staff at the school and like talk, and then that staff would be able to like refer them to that group. So I think that's what it reminded me of, that I don't know if there is a spoken thing other than, of course, like if people make comments, you know what I mean? Like if people say things that it's evident that they don't have like a certain worldview or point of view. Like, I think besides that, I think it's I don't know if cool is the right word, but it is a cool thing that I think as humans we can do. And again, maybe cool isn't the right word because I think a lot of this happens because of trauma. Like, so I don't know, out cool, but it's a thing that our bodies do. Like we are wired to try to survive. So like if we've been through trauma or like are in the middle of being traumatized, we have radars up in us to know when it's safe and when it's not. And like our body learns. And I think that it just made me think of that. I think that might be a thing.
Yeah. And I think it's evidence of our limbic systems at work too. I think that in any personal interaction, you know, each of us are picking up on obvious body language, voice tone inflection, facial cues, and we're picking up on the less obvious. It's all the nonverbals. So that I think that if a kid approaches a teacher and subconsciously or consciously picks up on those cues that teacher has a negative opinion of them, you know, then that's definitely going to, you know, put their spider sense up. And I think that, you know, without saying anything and them just knowing what teachers to talk to, I think it's because of those interactions. I think it's because of how, you know, if I walk up to somebody to speak with them and they never look me in the eye, then I'm going to think, oh, well, either they don't like me or I'm bothering them or they don't want to talk to me or, you know, versus if I go to speak to somebody and they stop what they're doing and they turn to look at me and they smile and, you know, they engage fully, I'm going to think, oh man, I love coming up and talking to this person and I want to continue doing so.
Yeah. So I'm getting to the last of it. I promise. I feel like this is probably going to be a long one, but, again, in those questions, and I don't know what this question was that got you guys on this topic, but, Jeremy said, and this is a quote, I haven't earned a spot of having an opinion about trans people. It isn't my lived experience. I can't walk into a room and say I have expertise. And I just couldn't love that more. And he talked about centering clients as experts in that same kind of sentence. And I feel like for some reason, and I know like centering the client and it being client driven, like that's not new. That's also everywhere in social work. And like that's, I don't mean to say that that's new, but something about the way that he said that made it like sink a little deeper into me. Like that it's not, I think just the key to being like a curious human and not thinking, even if you have done research and you've gotten a degree and you know things about the human experience, for a person to sit in the room and ask them how they experience it, like that just feels really significant and powerful and cool.
Yeah. Well, it touches on what Gert said a couple of weeks ago about, you know, asking for the wisdom that comes from a kid.
Oh, yes.
And I think what's so powerful about what Jeremy is saying in that is that in the same like breath, he is modeling that and saying it. Like, I am a member of LGBTQ, but I am not that particular letter. And so I can't speak for them, you know, rather I can only speak for me and my experience. And so I you know, to offer curiosity and all of those is something else.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you guys got into the topic of curiosity after that. And I'm learning about myself that I think, you know, when people ask like, what's one quality you don't like in people, or I don't know, what type of people do you not get along with? I don't know if I've ever had a good answer for that, and I haven't really known, and I'm learning one. And that one is when people are like the opposite of curious, like when they assume that they know everything about a person's experience, even though they're different. So like clearly they've had different experiences. Anyways, I'm just learning that that's a pet peeve of mine. And so I was soaking all of that up when you guys were talking about curiosity, and he kind of said that. I love that. And then the last thing is, and you and I talked a little bit about this before we started recording, just that he had questions that he said, why were these questions a thing? I think it was like how to become safe, or for people to know how they can be safe for others. I don't know. I'm probably butchering that. But he asked the questions: what would it be like to have your close relationships voted on in the election cycle? What would it be like to walk in a room and not know who is safe? And both of those just really, I think, are powerful and need to be said again. I think if you didn't think about those and reflect on those when you first heard them from Jeremy, I would love to like invite people to do that and to reflect on those now. Because I think it's impossible to reflect on those questions and not have compassion and curiosity and just love for people. Mm-hmm. So that's all.
I think the dog is ready for dinner. As am I. I'm going to say it. The two guys in this house are both ready for dinner. So I think that it's probably safe to go ahead and raise the lights, lower the curtain, and say that for this week, the theater is closed.